If you've heard the terms neutral spine or neutral pelvis used in fitness or in Pilates, you might be a little bit confused because they kind of sound like the same thing, but maybe you're different. I'd like to clear things up a little bit. So when fitness teachers refer to neutral spine, what they usually mean is your spine is retaining its normal curves, which go like this, right? We have a curve in our lower back, and then it curves the other way, and it curves again in our neck. And if you're rounding your back, that wouldn't be neutral, is the thinking when we talk about neutral spine. You're basically just keeping your spine in its natural position. So in Pilates, when we refer to neutral, what we hopefully are talking about instead is neutral pelvis. The reason for this is that everyone's spine is different. There are very large and natural normal variations in the curvatures of the spine. And some people might have, I tend to have a bit more of an extra curve here in my lower back. And some people have a much flatter area in the lower back. In order to try and make my spine flatter, though, I would have to change my pelvic position. And that's something we don't want in Pilates. We're trying to actually stabilize the pelvis. So the goal is neutral pelvis, and I want to show you, maybe you can join me and we can experience this on the mat together. So in the very first class of my beginner series, I explain the pelvic clock. So once again, if my back has an arch here, a deeper arch than some people who might have a straighter spine in that area, I'm going to have a little bit of space under my lower back when I get my pelvic clock in its neutral position. And what neutral means, if I was just going to describe what it feels like to my pelvis and yours too, is I have the weight on the center back of my pelvis. So the weight is neither tipped away towards the tailbone or it's not tipped towards me so that I feel the weight at the top of the pelvis. It's just in the center back of my pelvis, and I can really pull in and keep my pelvis in that position when I move my limbs and when I move my upper body. It can actually stay in that position. If you do have some extra curve in your lower back like I do, it can be helpful to use a pad under the lower back to just, especially at the beginning, to give you a little something to pull your lower abs into so that you can feel where your abs should be going. This is a crutch, and I like to say, like, if you are using it at the beginning, it's a good idea to try and start, as you get stronger, making it perhaps a little thinner, and then moving to where you don't use it at all, because this is something that you want to deepen and strengthen your abs all the way by yourself before just relying on a pad forever. So it's okay if your lower back isn't touching when your pelvis is neutral. And I hope that's clearing up the idea that what we want to be talking about, and if you hear a fitness instructor or teacher talk about neutral spine when you're lying on your back, what they probably are meaning is neutral pelvis. Or you could just transfer that thinking to, okay, I'm going to keep my pelvis stable, and wherever my back is, it's just in its natural curves, right? Because that's going to help you do that better. Okay, so now I have one more thing to go over, which is a more advanced idea in the neutral pelvis arena. So when we start Pilates, we just are keeping out everything simple, and we're learning just how to find some connection to our abdominals in our roll up and our roll down, and our knees are bent. So it's actually quite simple what we're doing. We're just rounding our back, and we're lengthening and working all of those muscles. Later, when we begin to straighten our legs on the mat and do that same roll up, there are some habits that we might start adding into it that you might not be aware of. And we want to try to identify and avoid these because they can end up being habits you do forever, and you don't want that. So when the legs are straight, what might happen when you start to roll up is, in order to balance out any weaknesses, instead of keeping your pelvis neutral or in that weight on the center back of the pelvis, instead, we tend to tuck the pelvis and put the weight on the top of the pelvis so that we can get some extra action to roll up. And this is actually something we don't want because we're not actually using the right muscles in that case. We're not coordinating things properly. Instead, what we want to do is keep the pelvis in that neutral position until we've come up and lifted the lower back off the mat. And then the pelvis starts to shift forward as we roll with our body. And then the pelvis starts the movement back. And once the pelvis is down on the mat, you can see my lower back, my pelvis is flat, but my lower back isn't on the mat yet. And then the lower back goes down. So once again, instead of coming up with a tuck to get up, I'm keeping that flat and then allowing it to lift and come forward. That's quite a lot to think about for a beginner. So if you do notice that something seems to be going wrong on your roll-ups, or any exercise like the neck pull when your legs are straight, instead what you want to do is just go back to bent knees and focus on keeping the pelvis working. And if that's not happening there, then go back to rolling down and finding that difficult spot where you have to transition from your pelvis has gotten to the mat and now you have to roll your back down, and that's really hard. And maybe you need a little help or something to pull on. In the full studio, we use the springs on an apparatus like this Cadillac behind me. And that's what teaches us that skill of rolling down and up. When you're on the mat by yourself, you just have to work it like crazy. So I hope that helps clear things up. If you have further questions, please ask them in the comments below. And again, if somebody's referring to neutral spine, you can remember if you're lying down on the mat, it's probably what they really mean is neutral pelvis. So put your weight on the center back of your pelvis and you'll be all set.